Inside Pelican Bay, America's most feared Supermax prison, the blood-stained yard. The night air clung heavy to the razor-wire fences of Crescent City, California. Beyond the steel and concrete walls of Pelican Bay State Prison, waves crashed against the jagged coast. Inside, however, another storm was brewing, one that wouldn't wash away with the tide. It began with a body. Just before dawn, Correctional Officer Miguel Ortega spotted something unusual on the surveillance monitors. In the corner of the yard, under the dim glow of the tower lights, lay an inmate sprawled motionless on the cold cement. Blood leaked from his chest, a dark halo spreading across his prison blues. The alarm blared. Guards swarmed the yard. Within minutes, the prison was on full lockdown. Every inmate was ordered to the ground, hands behind their heads. Officers, armed with rifles and batons, searched for weapons, for witnesses, for anything that could explain how a man had been stabbed to death in one of the most secure prisons in America. The victim's name was Marcus "Trigger" Hayes, a 34-year-old serving a life sentence for armed robbery and murder. Hayes wasn't just another inmate. He was a shot caller for one of the most powerful prison gangs on the West Coast. His murder wasn't just an isolated act of violence, it was a declaration of war. Detective Sarah Delgado of the Del Norte County Sheriff's Office was called to the scene. Standing over Hayes' lifeless body, she noticed something strange. The knife wasn't prison-made. It wasn't a sharpened toothbrush or a piece of scrap metal. It was a military-grade combat blade. "How the hell does a weapon like this get inside Pelican Bay?" she muttered under her breath. The question echoed louder than the sirens. Pelican Bay was a fortress built to crush the most dangerous men in America. Inmates spent 22 hours a day in windowless cells, locked behind steel doors. The prison was designed to break their will, to suffocate their power. Yet here was proof that someone inside had connections strong enough to smuggle in a weapon of war. The guards whispered among themselves, fearful. Hayes had enemies in every corner of the prison. He had ordered beatings, orchestrated drug runs, and even arranged hits beyond the walls. But who would dare strike him inside his own stronghold? Detective Delgado began interviewing inmates. Most kept their eyes down, repeating the same line, "Didn't see nothing. Don't know nothing." But one man, a wiry inmate named Antonio Vega, couldn't hide his trembling hands. Vega finally cracked. "They told me, if I didn't do it they'd come for my family," he whispered. His words came out like broken glass in his throat. "Who told you?" Delgado pressed. Vega looked around the room as if the walls themselves were listening. "The Brotherhood," he muttered before refusing to say another word. "The Aryan Brotherhood. One of the most feared prison gangs in America. Known for their ruthlessness, their network stretched from the deserts of Arizona to the cell blocks of California." But Detective Delgado knew there was more to this. Hayes wasn't just a rival. He was an asset. And eliminating him meant someone wanted to tip the balance of power inside Pelican Bay. That night, a riot nearly exploded in the security housing unit, the infamous SHU. Latino inmates demanded answers, claiming the Brotherhood had violated the unspoken rules of the yard. Officers in riot gear flooded the tiers, firing pepper spray and rubber bullets to keep chaos from erupting. But chaos had already arrived. The prison warden, a hardened veteran named Frank Donnelly, called Delgado into his office. His face was grim, his voice low. "You need to understand something, detective. Hayes wasn't killed because of some beef in the yard. He was silenced. He was about to testify." Delgado froze. "Testify? Against who?" "Against one of our own," Donnelly admitted. "A corrections officer." Hayes had evidence of a guard running contraband into the prison. Drugs, phones, weapons, you name it. He was ready to flip, and now he's dead. The revelation hit like a hammer. If Hayes had been murdered to protect a corrupt guard, it meant the rot inside Pelican Bay wasn't just among the inmates, it was in the very system meant to control them. The next day, Delgado received a package delivered anonymously to her office. Inside was a small, blood-stained notebook. The handwriting was messy, scrawled in a rush. It detailed names, dates, and transactions, evidence that contraband was being funneled through the prison with the help of an officer. At the bottom of one page was a chilling note. "If I die, start with the basement." Delgado's heart pounded as she stared at the words. The basement of Pelican Bay wasn't just a storage area. It was where old records, confiscated items, and forgotten evidence were kept. A place rarely visited, sealed off by heavy locks. She knew what she had to do. That evening, accompanied by 2 deputies, she descended into the bowels of the prison. Dust choked the air. The fluorescent lights flickered weakly overhead. Every step echoed like a warning. At the far end of the basement, she found the door Hayes had mentioned. The lock had been tampered with recently. Delgado's hands shook as she forced it open. Inside, the room was filled with boxes stacked high against the walls. But in the center lay something far more disturbing. A hidden stash of contraband. Cell phones, packets of heroin, stacks of cash, and more weapons. And taped to the wall above it all was a photograph. The image made Delgado's blood run cold. It showed Hayes, alive, shaking hands with a man in a guard's uniform. The guard's face was clear, his name tag visible. It was Officer Miguel Ortega, the same man who had discovered Hayes' body on the yard. Delgado's breath caught in her throat. She realized with a sickening certainty that the investigation had just taken a deadly turn. And then, in the silence of the basement, a voice echoed from the shadows. "You shouldn't have come here, detective." The sound of a gun cocking broke the stillness. The betrayal within. Detective Sarah Delgado froze, her pulse thundering in her ears. The echo of the cocked pistol seemed to linger in the damp air of the prison basement. Slowly, she turned her head toward the voice. Officer Miguel Ortega stood in the doorway, his uniform immaculate, his service weapon aimed directly at her chest. His calm expression was more chilling than the gun itself. "You've been busy," Ortega said, stepping into the room. The flickering light overhead caught the sharp lines of his jaw, the cold focus in his eyes. "I warned the warden this would happen. Stick your nose too deep and you'll end up like Hayes." Delgado forced her voice steady. "You killed him." Ortega shook his head. "No, I didn't kill him. But I made sure he wouldn't get the chance to talk." He gestured at the boxes of contraband with a tilt of his gun. "Do you really think this prison runs on discipline and fear alone?" "No, detective. It runs on money. And I've been feeding the machine for years." Delgado's deputies shifted uneasily beside her, hands twitching near their holsters. Ortega noticed and smirked. "Go ahead," he taunted. "Try it. The Brotherhood already knows you're down here. You think they'll let you walk back upstairs alive?" The words settled heavy in the room. For the first time, Delgado realized the full scope of the corruption. This wasn't Ortega working alone. This was an entire network, guards, gangs, and money flowing like blood through the veins of Pelican Bay. But Delgado wasn't ready to die in a basement. She lifted her chin. "You're right. The Brotherhood doesn't forgive, but neither does justice. And sooner or later, someone will bring you down." Ortega's eyes narrowed, the gun unwavering. "That someone won't be you." Suddenly, the sound of heavy boots thundered down the stairwell. Ortega spun, his weapon jerking toward the noise. Delgado seized the moment. With a swift motion, she shoved one of the stacked boxes to the floor. It crashed open, spilling cell phones and cash across the concrete. The distraction was enough. One of her deputies drew and fired. The shot rang out like a bomb in the cramped space, shattering the tense silence. Ortega staggered back, clutching his shoulder, his pistol clattering to the ground. But before Delgado could secure him, chaos erupted. 3 inmates in maintenance uniforms stormed into the basement, Aryan Brotherhood soldiers, their eyes wild, makeshift shanks flashing in their hands. They weren't here to save Ortega. They were here to finish the job Hayes had warned about. Anyone who knew the truth had to die. The fight was brutal and fast. Delgado's deputies grappled with the attackers, fists and blades cutting through the air. Delgado herself lunged for Ortega's fallen pistol, gripping it with shaking hands. She fired twice. One inmate dropped, another stumbled back, bleeding. The basement filled with the acrid stench of gunpowder and sweat. When it was over, 2 inmates lay dead, one fled into the shadows, and Ortega slumped against the wall, blood seeping through his uniform. His face twisted in pain, but his voice was still venom. "You don't get it, detective," he rasped. "Killing me won't change anything. The system is built on this. Pelican Bay isn't a prison. It's a business, and business always finds a way." Delgado's hands trembled, but her voice was steel. "Then I'll burn the whole business down." She ordered her deputies to cuff Ortega, despite his injury. The evidence in the basement was overwhelming. Contraband, money trails, and now a corrupt officer exposed. But Delgado knew he was only the tip of the blade. The next weeks were a storm. News of Ortega's arrest spread like wildfire through the prison and beyond. Inmates whispered in the shadows, gangs plotted revenge, and guards eyed each other with suspicion. Investigators combed through the seized notebooks and contraband, uncovering connections that reached far outside Crescent City, to cartel networks in Mexico, biker gangs in Nevada, and even politicians with deep pockets in Sacramento. But the deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. Witnesses vanished. Evidence went missing from secure lockups. One night, Delgado's car was rammed off the road by an unmarked truck. She barely crawled out alive, shaken but determined. The message was clear: stop digging or you're next. Then came the most chilling twist of all. While processing Ortega's seized cell phone, technicians uncovered dozens of encrypted messages. When decoded, they revealed scheduled shipments, coded payments, and names. One name in particular made Delgado's stomach drop: Warden Frank Donnelly, the man who had confided in her. The man who claimed Hayes was silenced to protect a guard. The man who had pointed her toward the basement in the first place. Delgado felt her blood run cold. Donnelly hadn't been exposing the corruption. He had been controlling it. Ortega was just a pawn, disposable once the operation grew too obvious. She confronted Donnelly in his office late one evening. Rain lashed against the window as thunder rolled in from the coast. Donnelly sat calmly behind his desk as though he had been expecting her. "You're smarter than most," he said quietly, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. "But you should have known better than to think one detective could dismantle an empire." Delgado's hand hovered near her sidearm. "You killed Hayes. You manipulated Ortega. You orchestrated all of it." Donnelly raised his glass in mock salute. "I kept the peace. Do you know what happens when the Brotherhood and the Mexican Mafia go unchecked? Do you know how many bodies would pile up? I built a system where everyone gets what they want. The gangs get their cut, the guards get their bonuses, and the state gets a prison that stays quiet enough to ignore." Delgado's chest tightened with fury. "Quiet? Hayes is dead. Ortega's in cuffs. Inmates are bleeding in the basement. That's not peace, that's rot." Donnelly's smile faded. His voice dropped to a growl. "Rot is the foundation, detective. Without it, this whole place collapses." The room fell into silence, the storm outside raging like the truth inside. Delgado realized then that she couldn't win this fight in the shadows. Exposing Donnelly meant risking everything: her career, her safety, maybe even her life. She pulled out her phone and hit record. "Then let the world hear it from you," she said. Donnelly's eyes widened, rage flashing across his face. He lunged across the desk, knocking the phone from her hand. Papers scattered, the whiskey glass shattered, and suddenly his hands were around her throat. Delgado gasped for breath, fighting against his crushing grip. Her vision blurred, black dots swarming her sight. With the last of her strength, she reached for the broken glass on the floor and drove it into Donnelly's side. He roared in pain, collapsing backward, clutching his wound. Delgado stumbled to her feet, coughing, grabbing her phone from the floor. The recording was still running. Every word Donnelly had said was captured. The empire had finally exposed itself. Days later, Donnelly was arrested, his empire unraveling in front of cameras and courtroom lights. Ortega, from his hospital bed, agreed to testify in exchange for protection. The Brotherhood seethed with fury, but the evidence was too strong to bury. Pelican Bay would never be the same. But as Delgado stood on the cliffs overlooking the prison, the waves crashing below, she knew the battle wasn't over. For every Donnelly exposed, another waited in the shadows. Her phone buzzed. An anonymous message. No name, just 4 words that made her blood run cold. "The war has begun."